Exactly. And so, given that there are all of these distractions, and this is one thing in terms of Epstein, it's like you could say, yeah, it is a distraction, right? But it's not a distraction from the win of having Coca-Cola go back to cane sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup. Those are all distractions also. I think a lot of stuff, even the politicking, right? They are distractions from the much bigger things that are happening. And I do think that one of the, and I'd like to see what your thoughts are, but I think that one of the greatest existential threats that we have right now as a species is robots and artificial intelligence. Like, I do think that, as Elon Musk, I think he said it's summoning the demon, or as Leo Zagami refers to as cyber Satan, right? I do think that that's something that fits into this overall picture. It does fit into, I think, some of these more apocalyptic type ideas of what's happening with the world. Why are the elites, so rapidly trying to advance AI and the robot race? Are they, is there going to be some sort of mass die-off event they predict that's going to happen? They're going to need to have a robot force to kind of replace the humans that don't make it through. I mean, there's that whole angle, which is kind of a rabbit hole in and of itself, but also just looking at what's happening with the development of AI. And that's something that concerns me greatly, actually. I'm way more concerned about AI than I am Epstein, right? As much as I want to have Epstein come out and I want to see who the perpetrators are and I want to have justice, and of course it's a given, but I'm worried about where the direction that AI is going, especially if it's left unchecked.
Oh, it's so true. So let me add to your calculus a few things to keep in mind. First and foremost, right? We already know genetic manipulation is a thing. Let us recall the taxonomy of a human. Homo sapiens sapiens is defined as, quote unquote, a species to be experimented upon. If I haven't sent it to you, I'll send it to you again. Put it in the show notes, because that is a fact, right? That's the definition. We are a species to be experimented upon, which then begs the question, who's doing the experimentation? I think it goes to your point that there is a different species, an older one, whatever. We've been manipulated for thousands of years. We are livestock to them. So what do you do when your herd of cows gets too big, called a herd, or maybe you switch to sheep or whatever else? And now we see that they've taken procreation out of the hands of man, right? So now you get 3 people donated DNA to create 8 babies that are now on this planet. Those are artificially created people. They were genetically engineered. We don't know genetically engineered to be what other than. They were genetically engineered to be something other than God's creation, right? Man and a woman create babies, God's creation, right? That's the divinity inside of us. Now you got science creating genetically modified beings that are not God's creation. And so when you see that there's a whole division in Health and Human Services, it's called the SynBio division, it stands for synthetic biology, and their job is to genetically manipulate every plant and animal species on this planet. What they're doing is changing this planet from God's creation to their own creation. And they are, and Noah Harari talks about it, we are becoming gods through genetic manipulation. And that goes hand in hand with the AI that you talk about. They don't need humanity anymore as a slave class, because that's what we've been. Now they have everything that they need to do it without us. We're now a nuisance because we have a habit of saying no and thinking for ourselves.
Yes, I wonder if that's part of it. Actually, is creating a more compliant race, because I think that's actually one of the. If you look at this and if you are trying to understand this battle of good and evil, right? This battle that's happening, for me, at least, I'm sure you're this, based on our conversations, you're in the same boat. You eventually, you get to the place where you realize, wow, it's just a battle of good versus evil. It is a battle of the angels and the warriors of light that are trying their best to represent God and God's will and virtue and justice up against Satan's minions, right? And okay, so you get there, but then you realize that, but they don't have God on their side. If that's the case, it's like our general actually kicked their general out of heaven, right? So it's like, well, who's really the general that's in charge here? But I do believe, though, that one of the things that God gave us is free will. right? As you mentioned, the most powerful word that we have in this fight is no, right? We have the ability to say, I'm not going to do that. I will not comply. I will not send my kids off to your schools. I will not watch your degenerate TV programs. I will not inject myself with your DNA modifying technology. I'm not going to do that. But you can see that maybe as part of it is actually, and I've seen that. I saw that with a lot of the people, kind of diagnosing and looking, okay, what are the real effects of the COVID vaccine? That they saw mental changes, actually, that they saw people even kind of, in essence, I saw a lot of people talking about how they felt like they got cut off from God. It's interesting, right? The sensation, the feeling of not hearing God talk to them anymore. And I think that's actually what they're trying to do, is to create a race of beings that at the genetic level is no longer connected to God. And because I think that that's the only way that they think they can win, is to cut us off like that.
Well, they did. They did. So you may recall, part of the evidence that we put into the record, we served Lloyd Austin before he issued the order, was the military's very own study. They did a study on 44,000 service members and their families using the COVID shots. 178 people finished the clinical trial out of 44,000. Only 178 finished it. But of those that showed up to the clinical trial, they went home with 1,291 new diseases they didn't go to the trial with. The very first and most significant serious adverse event, otherwise known as a side effect, was the 1p36 gene deletion syndrome. That's a genetic trait. It's passed on, right, genetically. Somehow it was a side effect of the shots. That gene regulates your frontal cortex and your executive function. And what we found in the military, because we were tracking it, was pilots couldn't get through the training. They couldn't get through the programs to become pilots because they couldn't think. They couldn't reason. So when you talk about, effectively vax zombies, this is what we're talking about. Of those,
actually, I'll read this real quick. It says that the
ahead.
1p36 deletion syndrome is a disorder that typically causes intellectual disabilities. Most affected individuals do not speak or speak only a few words. They may have temper tantrums, bite themselves, or exhibit other behavior problems. Most have structural abnormalities of the brain, and seizures occur in more than half of individuals with this disorder. Affected individuals usually have weak muscle tone and difficulty swallowing. Yeah. Interesting.
So this was a side effect of the shots. The very first side effect cited was that. And so how is it that a congenital disease happens as a side effect of a shot other than by genetic manipulation? It's genetic deletion. They deleted the gene that regulates your frontal cortex, and then we wonder why it is that people's brains are atrophying. And by the way, out of those 1,291 diseases, 1/3 of those were genetic diseases caused by the shots. And this study was by Pfizer, the DOD, and the FDA. They all did it together. And they did it a year in advance of rolling out the shots. In other words, I put into Lloyd Austin's hands, before he issued the order, his own study saying, hey, if you do this, you're going to frag your troops. By the way, one of the serious side effects, death, right? Death and disability, and we watch the numbers grow. They know this, Seth. What I'm trying to say is that it is a plan, and it's taken 5 years for humanity to understand that this has been a plan for a very long time, and we are neck deep in the middle of an eradication program, an extinction level event. And it's only now that humanity is embracing the truth. I just pray it isn't too late. And it's like, wake up, smell the coffee, get with the program here. You better start exercising your free will, or otherwise we're all gone. As long as we have the numbers, Seth, and I think really only half the world got these shots, or more than one shot for that matter. I think we got a chance, but it really takes humanity putting aside the divisiveness. It's so easy to to goat us into division through, well, that person's got green hair, or that person's, black, or whatever the case is. We're so easily manipulated. And if we can just remember we are all God's creations, right? At the end of the day, it's a brotherhood of humanity. We bind together in that solidarity and put aside all the rest of this crap. We have a fighting chance. But until that happens, as long as we stay divided, they will